Hey YouTube, I'm here with another book review, and this time I'm reviewing Ta-Nehisi Coates's Between the World and Me. Uh, I read this book a while ago, a few months ago, and I liked it um, a lot. I liked it enough to review it, but I didn't know what to say about it. I mean, it's a fairly short book. It's fairly slim. It's about 150 pages in my edition, and it's not the first work of nonfiction I've read this year. Um, but I just don't know how to review nonfiction. I guess I'll try, give my thoughts on it, same way I do with novels. And I just didn't want to review it because I didn't feel like I have much to say about it. I don't know much about its subject matter. Um, and I don't like talking about, let's say, racism in the U.S. because I don't live in the U.S. I don't really feel qualified to talk about it. But I think it's become like a big deal the past month since the murder of George Floyd. And I mean, this is something I already know about. That it happens regularly, a very regular, very regular basis. Um, there was another black man that got shot by civilians. I think. Um, he was going out jogging, and then he was being chased by these. I don't know if they were members of the KKK or just racist, but they were chasing him, shooting him. I forgot his name. His name was, I think, Ahmed Aubrey or something. Maybe that was him. And I think every other week I hear a story of a black man or woman or child. I don't know, like either they get injured or shot or killed by police officers or whatever. And I do get upset every time. It's like I get upset every school shooting, but I mean, you get desensitized to it. It's awful to say, and it stopped becoming news in a certain way. Like it only becomes a big deal when there's a recording. And in the case of George Floyd, like a little girl was recording him as he was being choked by Chauvin. I didn't watch the video, but I heard the audio. That was kind of hard enough for me. I mean, I just felt like it didn't make any sense for people to protest only when it's being recorded. Why don't people? I don't know. I just don't want to judge Americans for their problems. I have my own here in Lebanon, but I don't know what it takes for people to react. I think the black community actually has been complaining. I mean, not just complaining, but surviving all the time. But I think from what I've read or just like watch on the news, is that like it's not enough if the black community cares. The white community and the rest of the U.S. population has to care for some kind of major change to happen. But like the reaction to this was so explosive that I mean, not just black people, but like young white kids started looting the streets, and it just turned into this whole other thing that was not just a peaceful protest or not just like a reaction to the death of an innocent man. It just became looting for the sake of looting. So I thought like it would be kind of like a shame not to review like this book because I thought like the book was very relevant from when it came from. It was published in 2015, around the time when Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner, or a bit after that, Eric Garner got killed. And it will always remain in that kind of relevance because I don't think the kind of institutional problems that led to their deaths. I mean, I don't know the way the police are trained, maybe, or the way I don't know law enforcement deals with petty crime, like selling cigarettes on the street, or I don't know, chasing after escape. I don't know, running suspected criminals who might be armed or not. I mean, I understand that if you're a police officer, your first reaction is to shoot if you're under threat. But if the person you're shooting at is unarmed and you kill him, and it's always the case you're more likely to kill that person if he's black than any other race or color. I mean, then that's wrong. I'm not saying that the solution is to shoot if like they shoot at every color. I'm just saying it's like it's becoming obvious that policing has to change. I mean, that's it. I don't want to talk about this too much. This is not my area. It's just something Americans have to deal with. I just want to talk about the book because it's I think it's fairly short. I can get through it pretty fast and succinctly, and I would say that apart from its political social political value, there is a lot of literary value to it. I mean, it's a letter quotes right to his son's name's Samori, um, and it just feels personal from the first page onwards. It's one long letter he writes to his son, and I just think I would say it's a fairly nice literary uh, technique. It doesn't seem too gimmicky because I just felt that I don't every time I read about race, it's always in a very political, social political point of view that makes it very charged and hard for me to relate or care about, even though I think it's important because I can't really sympathize, or no, not sympathize, I just can't, like, I can understand how dangerous it is that if I was in the place of these people who, who are more likely to, you know, live in a poor neighborhood or likely to be, killed by cops just because I was born into that race. But I don't really feel the visceral panic and terror or the anger or the hopelessness that, Coates kind of brings to life. Like, I don't read a lot of books by African American writers. I mean, I've mostly read books by dead white men. I've been trying to correct that the past year or so. Being, writers from, all around the world. And I mean, he kind of like Coates paints a very I don't want to say bleak, but like a very sober picture of race relations in the states right now. He I don't I don't want to say he doesn't believe that there's been some progress, but he believes that America is still dealing with the legacy of Civil War. That the U.S. has not really dealt well the legacy of the Civil War. There's no um, substantial progress in that. Even though, let's say, the slaves were freed, African Americans today are incarcerated at a much higher rate than any other demographic group. Um, and there I can't think of like is there any other population that has its men missing just because they're I don't know born into that race and they grew up in poor neighborhoods and it's harder for them to find legitimate employment. Even if you're a felon, if I don't know what kind of petty crime you do, you get out of prison, it's hard to get a job because of discrimination of not just being black, but because you're a felon. All these obstacles, and and I'm all over the place. But I just I mean I don't see why if you're going to write a book about race relations and you're someone who experiences um, all these obstacles in your life firsthand. why you have to present a hopeful, optimistic picture if you know the truth is if you know that the truth is that it's not that easy. It's not that optimistic. I don't think Coates wants to say that give up or lose hope, but his message is just if you want to live, you have to struggle, and we won't ever be free if these people who think they are white still believe they are white. Now this is interesting because I never really thought of white and black as like I mean, I never really thought of race as like a belief. I thought it was like a. I know that race is kind of it is a social construct in part. It's based on people's skin color, but it's very interesting that I listened to podcasts, Joe Rogan interviewing Cornel West, where West said that the reason white America exists is because there is a non-white America. There are these Africans and people of color. As soon as assume racists get what they want, assume Nazis at the KKK, rule all of white America. What's going to happen? Are they only going to live in peace and have a white America? No, they're going to start picking on the darker looking people of the white race, the maybe more the swarthy looking Mediterraneans or some Lebanese people who pass for white but end up, they look more Mediterranean and Greek. All the Mediterranean looking ones, like the Spanish, Italians, and Greek are going to start being treated worse. And suppose you get rid of them, it's just going to, differentiate white based on other whites, and you're just left with the Scandinavians. And I don't know. It's very interesting in that like the idea of white America is just anyone that's not black, and these are very fluid constructs that just come from I don't know. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as a a kind of race you're born into, but like I never thought of as like race and as being like solidified based on the presence of someone of another race. I don't know. Like I did question if I ever feel like I belong to a race. I don't know if I am white technically, or if I am. I don't definitely don't feel like a person of color, especially in Lebanon. But it just it made me think a lot about the consequences of just being born into a race that you didn't choose to. I don't know. It just feels very difficult to talk about this book. I guess to make it easy, I'll just read the first paragraph. Son, last Sunday, the host of a popular news show asked me what it meant to lose my body. The host was broadcasting from Washington, D.C., and I was seated in a remote studio on the far side of West Manhattan. A satellite closed the miles between us, but no machinery could close the gap between her world and the world for which I had been summoned to speak. When the host asked me about my body, her face faded from the screen and was replaced by a scroll of words written by me earlier that week. The host read these words for the audience, and when she finished, she turned to the subject of my body, although she did not mention it specifically. But by now, I am accustomed to intelligent people asking about the condition of my body without realizing the nature of their request. Specifically, the host wished to know why I felt that white America's progress, or rather the progress of those Americans who believe that they are white, was built on looting and violence. Hearing this, I felt an old and indistinct sadness well up in me. The answer to this question is a record of the believers themselves. The answer is American history. Now that was very good introduction. I would say that kind of drew me in and made me really glad that I got the book in my hands, and it kind of was a very good foretaste of things to come. Uh, it already foreshadows how he believes that idea of progress is based on the destruction or the looting and violence on the black body. Well, economically, that it is true. The U.S. is ascendancy economically in its early history was based on this free labor. I mean, I guess you can call it slave labor and ability to plant, grow, process, and export cotton at a very low price. I mean, and it hasn't. And I think the main point Coates makes throughout the book is that the U.S. hasn't really reconciled itself with the consequences of this machinery, and that the Constitution, as great as it is granting all these rights to human beings, it was written not for African Americans, and women and ordinary men. At the time it was written for white men with property. It was granting rights to white men who owned land or property, and slowly over time it started to expand to give rights to all men, whether or not they own a property, and then to men and women much later, the early 20th century, maybe the late 19th, but I don't think so. I think women gained the right to vote in the early 20th century, and then to African Americans uh, after World War II. Actually don't know when African Americans got the right to vote. Maybe before then, but I know that they were still segregated up until the 60s, and that's when there was more progress made in terms of being treated equally. I mean, despite institutional violence. So like, despite these, you know, the sense of progress of like expanding these rights in the Constitution to uh, people of all races and sexes and all classes, there is still this machinery that the Constitution kind of assumes that there are these free slaves that work for nothing to produce this economy so that the rest of society can function as such, and that the U.S. has never really reconciled with that. Maybe that's why there's this large, uh, you know, prison, what do you call it, prison industrial complex where people get these long-term jail sentences because of this, what's it called, mandatory minimum sentencing, so that they can have these felons and these prisoners making stuff for how many dollars a day or a month? I don't know, like a few dollars a day, $20 a month, which is nothing. So I just think that Coates is just bringing back attention to how, despite the progress that's been made since the '60s for the African American community, there's still a long way to go. And yeah, I just don't feel comfortable talking about this. It's not my strong suit. It's nonfiction, and I don't feel like like I'm not American. I got a citizenship, but I never grew up there, and I don't feel comfortable talking about something happening in a country I don't live in. But I do feel that the death of George Floyd kind of did spark this outcry throughout the world. I think it made people, I mean, really aware that racism is kind of still alive despite everything else is going on. We have a pandemic already in the background. We have all these economic problems. I mean, it just shows that even the country and states that some people look at as one of the most progressive countries, that's still a problem. I mean, I know it, there's like a cartoonish fascist or demagogue that they have as president, but the U.S. is still a very democratic country compared to other countries, despite what's going on there, and despite how they're handling COVID, and like all these other countries that are kind of always being compared to Western countries for like falling short of a certain standard, seeing the U.S. also falling short of this supposed standard of upholding these virtues of equality, just seeing a cop killing one of its own citizens. I mean, Russia can now say, how can the U.S. badmouth us about what we do in our country in other countries if it does that to its own people? I mean, this is not a big deal in terms of just what happens domestically in U.S. politics, but this makes the U.S. lose face because the U.S. always was able to use this card as like we treat our citizens well with respect and equality. Now China and Russia gets to say no, you don't, and I just don't feel comfortable talking about it because I guess because I'm not used to reviewing nonfiction. It's a well written book, and to be honest, it's not a pleasant read in that it doesn't really make you feel good. It's not supposed to, whether you're black or white or whatever. I read it slowly because it was a very unpleasant I don't know reminder, I guess. Um, and it doesn't he doesn't guilt trip you or anything, but like there's a lot of anger in his words. But I think maybe the best parts of the book is how when he starts writing to his son directly, and you just feel the love Coates has for his son, and how he hopes that he becomes a better man than him. Uh, and hopefully lives a long life despite the odds against him. One thing that I think kind of shook me is that the scariest thing about being black in the States is that having a child and having to deal with the reality that my child's body is more fragile than that of any other person or like white person. And that there's a very high chance you will lose your child, if not to the police or then to the streets, to drugs, or to the prison system or whatever. I don't know. It's not just the physical violence, but it's also the social violence of like how, let's say, the crack epidemic in the 80s took away the men, and how meth took away the meth epidemic took away the women in the 90s. And yeah, the black community has been through a lot, and it's don't know, it's going to take a long time of healing for it to get back together. But I would say that there is hope in that there is like a very strong community in the black community in the States. It's just that there is a lot of work to be done, both by the communities and the government. Okay, I just want to end this here. This is getting to be a long review for a fairly short book. I hope you guys like this review. Um, it's been a while since I've reviewed some of it, rusty, and I try to prepare. I hope you're all staying safe during the pandemic. I know every different country is kind of handling it differently. I hope you don't get sick and stay sane in these crazy times. And hope you'll have some. Hope you a happy reading time.